My parents asked to borrow my gold credit card for a small $4,600 online payment last Tuesday. Nothing seemed suspicious until my sister Emma rolled up in a brand new Honda Civic 3 days later, followed by my brother Tyler, showing off his shiny Yamaha motorcycle. When I casually asked for my card back during Sunday dinner, my whole family burst into laughter. Dad wiped tears from his eyes and said it only had $11 left on it. I couldn't help but laugh too when I finally looked at the card they handed back. The card they used wasn't my personal credit card at all. It was my corporate expense card from Preston and Associates. Standing in my apartment bathroom with the door locked, I stared at the gold card in my trembling hands. The Preston and Associates logo gleamed under the fluorescent light, and my stomach dropped into my shoes. This wasn't just any credit card. This was my company's expense account with a $50,000 monthly limit that I used for client campaigns and business travel. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the customer service number on the back of the card. My voice shook as I provided my information to the representative, praying that somehow I was wrong about what my family had done. "Let me pull up your recent activity, Miss Thompson," the pleasant customer service agent said. I could hear typing in the background. "I see a $15,000 purchase at Honda of Sacramento on Thursday, followed by a $9,000 transaction at Yamaha Sports Center on Friday." My legs gave out and I slumped against the bathroom wall. The cold tile pressed against my back as reality crashed down around me. $24,000 in 2 days. But the agent wasn't finished. There are also several smaller transactions. Let me see here. Dinner at Morton's Steakhouse for $437, shopping at Nordstrom for $812, and 3 cash advances totaling $4,000. I closed my eyes and did the math. $28,000. My parents had spent $28,000 of my employer's money in 4 days, and they thought it was hilarious. "Miss Thompson, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. Can you tell me the remaining credit limit?" "You have $22,000 remaining on your account." I hung up the phone and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the bathroom floor. Downstairs, I could hear my family laughing and celebrating. Emma was probably showing off photos of her new car to our cousins, while Tyler revved his motorcycle engine in the driveway for the neighbors to admire. They had no idea what they'd done. My parents thought they'd maxed out my personal credit card and left me with a manageable debt. Instead, they'd committed corporate fraud that could land all of us in federal prison. Preston and Associates had strict policies about personal use of corporate cards. I'd signed agreements acknowledging that any unauthorized charges would result in immediate termination and potential criminal prosecution. The company had fired employees for charging personal lunches to their expense accounts. A car and motorcycle would be considered embezzlement. I pulled up my work email on my phone, dreading what I might find. My hands shook as I scrolled through messages looking for anything from my supervisor, Janet, or the accounting department. Nothing yet, but it was Sunday evening. The charges probably wouldn't be reviewed until Monday morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Thanks again, sis. This bike is amazing. You're the best." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run downstairs and shake him until he understood the magnitude of what they'd done. But I couldn't move. I sat on my bathroom floor, paralyzed by the knowledge that my career was over and my family had destroyed my life without even realizing it. Another text from Emma. "The car drives like a dream. I'll pay you back $50 a month, I promise." $50 a month. It would take her 25 years to pay back the car at that rate, assuming she never missed a payment. And that was just the car. The motorcycle, the dinners, the shopping sprees, the cash advances. My parents had treated my corporate expense account like their personal piggy bank. I finally stood up and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman whose life had just imploded and who had no idea how to put it back together. The worst part was that my family was downstairs celebrating their good fortune, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd just destroyed everything I'd worked for. Monday morning arrived like a death sentence. I barely slept, spending most of the night researching corporate fraud cases and their consequences. The stories I found online made my blood run cold. employees sentenced to 3 to 5 years in federal prison, civil lawsuits demanding full restitution plus damages, professional licenses revoked permanently. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop reading case after case of people whose lives were ruined by misuse of corporate credit cards. One woman in Texas lost her house when her employer sued her for unauthorized charges. A man in Florida spent 18 months in federal prison for letting his wife use his corporate card for personal expenses. At 7:30 in the morning, my phone chimed with an email notification. My heart stopped when I saw the sender, Janet Morrison, Senior Vice President of Client Services. Brittany, I need to see you in my office first thing this morning. Please bring all documentation related to your recent expense account activity. We need to discuss some irregularities that came to our attention over the weekend. Over the weekend. That meant someone in accounting had already flagged the charges. They knew about the car and the motorcycle. They probably knew about the cash advances, too. I showered and dressed in my most professional outfit as if looking the part of a responsible employee could somehow undo what my family had done. The 20-minute drive to Preston and Associates felt like a funeral procession. The office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, but I felt like I was walking through a nightmare. Colleagues greeted me with their normal, cheerful hellos, having no idea that I was about to be terminated and possibly arrested. Janet's assistant directed me to wait in the small conference room adjacent to her office. I sat there for what felt like hours watching the clock tick toward 9 o'clock and knowing that each passing minute brought me closer to professional destruction. When Janet finally entered, she carried a thick manila folder and wore the serious expression she reserved for firing people. She was followed by David Chen from accounting and Lisa Rodriguez from human resources. My heart sank further when I saw the third person entering behind them, Marcus Webb from legal. Brittany, thank you for coming in early. Janet sat across from me and opened the folder. We received an automated alert over the weekend regarding unusual activity on your corporate expense account. She spread out printed statements showing all of my family's purchases in stark black and white. $15,000 to Honda of Sacramento, $9,000 to Yamaha Sports Center. The numbers seemed to glow on the page like accusations. These charges fall outside the normal pattern of your business expenses, David said, adjusting his glasses. A vehicle purchase and a motorcycle don't align with your role in client services. Can you explain these transactions? Janet asked. I took a deep breath and made the decision that would determine the rest of my life. I could lie and claim the purchases were legitimate business expenses. I could say the car was for client transportation and the motorcycle was for some creative campaign. But those lies would only make things worse when the truth inevitably came out. My family used my corporate card without my permission, I said quietly. They thought it was my personal credit card. The silence in the room was deafening. Lisa made notes on her legal pad while Marcus leaned forward with interest. Are you saying these charges were unauthorized? Marcus asked. Yes, my parents borrowed what they thought was my personal credit card to make an online payment. When I got the card back, I realized they'd taken my corporate card instead. Janet exchanged glances with the other executives. Brittany, you understand the seriousness of this situation. Unauthorized use of corporate funds is considered embezzlement under federal law. I know. I've been researching it all night. The company's policy is clear, Lisa said, consulting her folder. Any personal use of corporate credit cards results in immediate termination and referral to law enforcement. However, Marcus interrupted, if this was truly unauthorized use by third parties, that changes the legal landscape considerably. Janet nodded slowly. We need to determine whether this was employee misconduct or employee victimization. Either way, we're required to report it to authorities. My mouth went dry. Report it to authorities. Corporate fraud exceeding $10,000 must be reported to federal agencies, Marcus explained. The FBI will investigate whether you're a perpetrator or a victim. I stared at the printed statements, watching my family's spending spree destroy my career in real time. $28,000 worth of unauthorized charges that would follow me for the rest of my life. What happens now? I asked. You're suspended pending investigation, Janet said. We'll need you to cooperate fully with law enforcement and provide any documentation that supports your claim of unauthorized use. I nodded numbly, understanding that my life as I knew it was over. I drove straight to my parents' house after leaving the office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The Honda Civic sat in the driveway like evidence at a crime scene, its pristine paint job gleaming in the afternoon sun. Tyler's Yamaha motorcycle was parked next to it, still adorned with the temporary tags from the dealership. Seeing those two vehicles purchased with stolen corporate funds made my stomach churn with a mixture of rage and desperation. I found my family in the living room exactly where I'd left them the night before. Mom was showing Emma's new car photos to Aunt Sandra on her phone, while Dad and Tyler discussed motorcycle maintenance schedules. They looked up when I entered, still glowing with the satisfaction of their weekend shopping spree. "Hey, honey," Mom said without looking away from her phone. "You left pretty early yesterday. Everything okay?" I sat down on the couch across from them, trying to find the right words to explain that they'd committed federal crimes and destroyed my career. How do you tell the people you love that they've ruined your life without even realizing it? "We need to talk about the credit card you used this weekend." Dad chuckled and gestured toward Tyler's motorcycle keys on the coffee table. "Don't worry, sweetheart, we'll pay you back gradually, maybe $50 a month from each of us. That card wasn't my personal credit card, it was my corporate expense account from work." The room fell silent. Emma looked up from admiring her car keys while Tyler paused mid-sentence in his conversation about motorcycle gear. "What do you mean, corporate?" Mom asked slowly. "I mean, you used my company's credit card, the one I use for business travel and client expenses. You spent $28,000 of my employer's money." Dad's face flushed red. "Now wait just a minute. You gave us a credit card and said we could use it for the online payment. You never said anything about it being a work card. You asked to borrow my credit card. I handed you my wallet and told you to take whatever you needed. I never authorized you to buy a car and a motorcycle." "Don't get smart with us, young lady," Mom snapped. "You know we've been struggling financially. We thought you were finally helping your family instead of hoarding your money like some kind of miser." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd been paying their electric bill for 6 months and had given them over $3,000 in cash throughout the year. But apparently, that generosity made me a miser. "This isn't about helping family," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "This is about federal fraud. I got called into my boss's office this morning. They've suspended me pending an FBI investigation." Tyler laughed dismissively. "Come on, Britt, you're being dramatic. Companies have insurance for this kind of thing. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." I stared at my brother in disbelief. "You bought a $9,000 motorcycle with my employer's money. Emma bought a $15,000 car. That's not a misunderstanding, that's embezzlement." Emma's face crumpled. "I didn't know it was a work card. I thought you were being generous for once." Being generous for once. The word stung more than I expected. I've been helping all of you financially for years. Helping. Dad stood up, towering over me with the intimidating presence he'd used to control our family my entire childhood. "You mean throwing us scraps when it's convenient for you real family members share their success instead of acting superior?" "Frank, sit down," Mom said, but her tone suggested she agreed with his sentiment. "No, Patricia. It's time someone told our daughter the truth about her attitude." Dad pointed his finger at me accusingly. "Ever since you got that fancy marketing job, you've acted like you're better than us, like we're embarrassing relatives you have to tolerate." The unfairness of his accusation left me speechless. I'd never acted superior to my family. If anything, I'd bent over backward to maintain relationships despite their constant financial requests and emotional manipulation. "You owe us," Mom said firmly. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. We sent you to college when we couldn't afford it. Now you have a good job and a nice apartment, and you begrudge helping the people who sacrificed everything for you." "I don't begrudge helping you." I said, tears forming in my eyes. But this isn't helping. This is stealing from my employer. I could go to prison. Tyler rolled his eyes. You're not going to prison, Britt. Stop being so dramatic. The FBI investigates corporate fraud cases. I said, pulling out my phone to show them the research I'd done. People go to federal prison for this exact crime. Then you better figure out how to handle it, Dad said coldly. Because Emma needs that car for her new job and Tyler saved up for months to afford the down payment on that motorcycle. I stared at him in shock. Saved up for months, he didn't pay anything. You used my corporate card for the entire purchase. Details. Dad waved his hand dismissively. The point is, we're not returning anything. This family has made enough sacrifices. It's time for you to make some. Mom nodded in agreement. If you really cared about this family, you'd find a way to work this out with your company, instead of threatening to destroy your brother and sister's happiness. I looked around the room at the 4 people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. Instead, I saw people who viewed me as a resource to be exploited and blamed me for their own criminal behavior. If I don't report this as unauthorized use, I become an accessory to embezzlement. I explained one final time. If I do report it as unauthorized, they'll press charges against all of you. Then I guess you have a choice to make, Dad said. Your family or your precious job. The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Choose between protecting my family from the consequences of their crimes or protecting myself from being falsely imprisoned for their choices. As I looked at their expectant faces, I realized that my family had never really loved me. They loved what I could provide for them, and now they expected me to sacrifice my freedom to cover up their theft. I stood up and walked toward the door knowing that whatever choice I made would change our relationships forever. I barely slept Sunday night, tossing and turning as my family's ultimatum echoed in my mind. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I couldn't lie to federal investigators to protect people who viewed me as an expendable resource. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed carefully in my most conservative business suit, knowing this meeting would determine whether I spent the next few years rebuilding my career or defending myself in federal court. Janet's office felt smaller than usual when I arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. The same team from Friday sat around the conference table, Janet David from accounting, Lisa from human resources, and Marcus from legal. But this time, they were joined by 2 people I'd never seen before. Brittany, please sit down, Janet said, gesturing to the chair across from the strangers. I'd like you to meet Detective Sarah Martinez from the Sacramento Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit and Agent Robert Kim from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. My throat went dry. The FBI was already involved, which meant this was beyond corporate discipline. This was a federal criminal investigation. Detective Martinez opened a laptop computer and pulled out a digital recorder. Miss Thompson, we'd like to ask you some questions about your corporate expense account activity. You have the right to have an attorney present during this interview. Do I need an attorney? Agent Kim leaned forward. That depends on whether you're a victim of identity theft or a participant in corporate fraud. Marcus cleared his throat. The company has provided us with all relevant documentation regarding the unauthorized charges. We're here to determine the facts. Detective Martinez activated the recorder. Please state your name and position for the record. Brittany Thompson, Marketing Coordinator at Preston & Associates. Can you explain how your corporate credit card came to be used for personal vehicle purchases? I took a deep breath and told them exactly what happened. My parents asking to borrow my credit card for an online payment, giving them access to my wallet, discovering the charges when they returned what I thought was my personal card. Agent Kim made notes while I spoke. When I finished, he consulted his folder and pulled out several documents. Ms. Thompson, we've been investigating unusual activity associated with your personal information for the past 6 months. Are you aware that multiple credit applications have been submitted using your name and social security number? My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Detective Martinez turned her laptop screen toward me. We've identified 17 credit card applications and 3 personal loan applications submitted with your information since June. Best Buy, Target, Amazon Store Card, Capital One, Discover, Chase, Freedom. I stared at the screen, scrolling through application after application bearing my name, address, and social security number. All approved, all with credit limits ranging from $2,000 to $8,000 each. I didn't apply for any of these accounts, I whispered. The applications were submitted from IP addresses traced to your parents' residence, Agent Kim said. The merchandise purchased with these cards was delivered to their address as well. Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. This changes everything. If there's evidence of systematic identity theft, Brittany is clearly a victim rather than a perpetrator. There's more, Detective Martinez said, pulling up another screen. Bank records show unusual activity in accounts associated with your parents' social security numbers. Large cash deposits followed immediately by withdrawals and transfers. I felt dizzy as the scope of my family's crimes became clear. This wasn't just about the corporate credit card. They'd been systematically stealing my identity for months, building an empire of debt in my name. The corporate card incident appears to be the culmination of a larger identity theft scheme, Agent Kim explained. Your parents have been using your personal information to secure credit for several months. The corporate card was simply the largest available limit they could access. Janet looked at me with something approaching sympathy. Brittany, if you're a victim of identity theft, the company's position changes significantly. We'll need to work with law enforcement to recover the stolen funds and clear your record. However, Detective Martinez continued, we need to establish definitively that you had no knowledge of or participation in this scheme. The investigation will require full cooperation and complete transparency about your relationship with your family. I nodded numbly, understanding that proving my innocence would require destroying my family's claims that I willingly participated in their fraud. What happens to them? I asked quietly. Agent Kim's expression remained neutral. If we find sufficient evidence of systematic identity theft and fraud, we'll present the case to federal prosecutors. Given the amounts involved and the interstate nature of some transactions, they're likely to face federal charges. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My parents weren't just facing consequences for the corporate card incident. They were looking at federal prison time for months of calculated identity theft and fraud. We'll need you to provide us with any documentation you have regarding your interactions with your family about financial matters, Detective Martinez said. Text messages, emails, any communications that might establish the timeline and your knowledge or lack of knowledge about their activities. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through months of text messages from my parents, requesting money for various emergencies. Electric bills, car repairs, medical expenses, a pattern of financial dependence that I'd enabled without realizing I was being set up as a victim. There's one more thing, Agent Kim said, consulting his notes. We received a call this morning from your parents' attorney. They're claiming you masterminded this scheme and that they were acting under your direction. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my family destroyed my financial life, but now they were trying to send me to prison for their crimes. I looked around the room at the investigators and company executives, understanding that my family's love had always been conditional on my usefulness to them. And now that their theft had been exposed, they were perfectly willing to sacrifice me to save themselves. The meeting continued for 2 more hours as I provided every detail I could remember about my family's financial requests and my responses to them. By the end, I felt emotionally drained, but oddly relieved. For the first time in my life, I was telling the complete truth about my family's manipulation and exploitation. As I prepared to leave, Janet approached me privately. Brittany, I want you to know that the company recognizes you as a victim in this situation. We'll be working with law enforcement to support the investigation and clear your record. Take the time you need to deal with this situation. I thanked her and walked out of the office building knowing that my relationship with my family was over, but finally understanding that some relationships aren't worth preserving. 3 days after the corporate meeting, Detective Martinez called with news that made my hands shake as I held the phone. She asked me to come to the police station immediately to discuss new developments in the case. The Sacramento Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit occupied a sterile office building that smelled like coffee and photocopier toner. Detective Martinez led me to a small conference room where Agent Kim was already waiting with several thick files spread across the table. "Miss Thompson, thank you for coming in so quickly," Detective Martinez said as I sat down. "We've uncovered information that significantly expands the scope of this investigation." Agent Kim opened the largest file and pulled out a map covered with red pins. "Your parents aren't operating alone. We've identified a network of family members and associates conducting similar fraud schemes across California, Nevada, and Arizona." I stared at the map, counting dozens of pins marking locations where financial crimes had been reported. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with my parents?" "Your parents are part of what we call a family fraud ring," Detective Martinez explained. "They've been sharing information and techniques with other relatives to maximize their criminal profits." She handed me a photograph showing my Uncle Jerry and Aunt Sandra at what appeared to be a family barbecue. In the background, I could see documents spread across a picnic table. "This photo was taken by a neighbor who thought it was suspicious that your relatives were conducting what looked like business meetings during family gatherings. When we analyzed the image, we could see credit applications and identification documents on that table." Agent Kim pulled out another file. "Your Aunt Sandra has been recruiting targets through her church and community center volunteering. She identifies financially stable young adults and introduces them to family members who then cultivate relationships for the purpose of identity theft." The methodical nature of their crimes left me speechless. This wasn't desperate people making poor decisions. This was organized criminal enterprise masquerading as family gatherings. "We need to determine your level of involvement," Detective Martinez said seriously. "Either you're a victim who was systematically groomed and exploited, or you're a participant who's now trying to distance yourself from the conspiracy." I had no idea any of this was happening. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's what we need to establish definitively," Agent Kim replied. "Federal prosecutors are considering racketeering charges under the RICO Act. If you're found to be a knowing participant, you could face 20 years in federal prison." 20 years. The number echoed in my mind as I tried to process the magnitude of what my family had been doing. I thought about all the family gatherings where relatives huddled together discussing financial opportunities, while I naively assumed they were planning legitimate business ventures. "However," Detective Martinez continued, "if you're a victim, we need your complete cooperation to build cases against the other participants. That means providing evidence that might incriminate family members and testifying in federal court." The choice was becoming clear: protect family members who had systematically exploited me, or help law enforcement prosecute people who viewed me as a renewable resource for financial gain. "What kind of evidence do you need?" I asked. Agent Kim smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Documentation of their requests for personal information, records of financial assistance you provided, communications where they discussed their plans or mentioned other family members' activities." I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through 2 years of text messages from various relatives, requests for copies of my birth certificate, for family records, casual questions about my work address and supervisor's name in case of emergencies, suggestions that I add family members as authorized users on my credit cards for convenience. They were gathering intelligence, I realized aloud. Every piece of personal information I shared was part of building my profile for identity theft. "That's exactly right," Detective Martinez confirmed. "Successful family fraud rings spend months establishing trust and gathering information before they strike." Agent Kim opened his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "We've identified at least 12 other victims in your extended family network: cousins, family friends, co-workers of relatives, all young professionals with good credit and stable employment. He turned the screen toward me, showing a list of names I recognized from family gatherings. Sarah, my cousin who worked as a nurse, Mike, Uncle Jerry's stepson who managed a restaurant, Jennifer, Aunt Sandra's neighbor who attended our holiday celebrations. All of them have reported identity theft and fraudulent credit applications. All of them trusted family members with personal information. All of them discovered thousands of dollars in unauthorized debt. The pattern was undeniable. My family had turned identity theft into a systematic business model, recruiting victims from their own social circles and exploiting relationships built on love and trust. "There's something else you need to know," Detective Martinez said gently. "Your parents have retained a criminal defense attorney. They're claiming you orchestrated the entire scheme and that they were following your instructions." The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest. After everything I'd done to help and support them, my parents were willing to send me to federal prison to save themselves. "They've provided text messages taken out of context to suggest you encouraged their spending," Agent Kim continued. "Messages where you told them to get whatever they needed or not to worry about paying you back right away." I remembered those conversations. Times when my parents needed help with emergency expenses, and I'd reassured them that family support didn't require immediate repayment. Normal expressions of generosity twisted into evidence of criminal conspiracy. "Can they really make that case?" I asked. "Potentially," Agent Kim admitted. "Without clear evidence of your victimization, prosecutors might view you as the sophisticated accomplice who provided the family with access to high-limit corporate credit." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "That's why your cooperation is crucial. We need evidence that establishes your role as a victim rather than a perpetrator. Bank records showing you provided financial assistance without receiving benefits. Communications proving you were unaware of their broader criminal activities." I spent the next 3 hours providing every detail I could remember about my family's financial requests and my responses. By the end of the session, a clear picture emerged of systematic manipulation designed to establish me as a reliable source of personal information and emergency funding. "Based on this information, we're confident you're a victim," Detective Martinez concluded, "but proving that in federal court will require you to testify against your parents and other family members." As I left the police station, I understood that my family's betrayal was complete. They'd stolen my identity, destroyed my credit, damaged my career, and now they were trying to send me to prison for their crimes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than guilt and confusion. I felt angry. The investigation consumed my life for the next 2 weeks. My phone rang constantly with calls from investigators' attorneys and credit monitoring services. I'd been placed on administrative leave from Preston and Associates, leaving me isolated in my apartment with nothing but cable news and the growing stack of legal documents that marked the destruction of my old life. Marcus had been surprisingly supportive during the first week, bringing me groceries and staying overnight when the stress made sleeping impossible. But as the investigation expanded and media attention grew, I noticed his enthusiasm for supporting me beginning to wane. "Maybe you should consider settling this quietly," he suggested one evening while we ate takeout Chinese food on my couch. "Your family didn't mean to hurt you. They're just scared and making poor decisions." I stared at him in disbelief. Poor decisions, Marcus. They stole my identity and spent months building credit accounts in my name. Then they tried to frame me for masterminding the scheme. "I know, but think about the bigger picture," he said, setting down his chopsticks. "Even if you win this case, you'll destroy your relationship with your parents forever. Is that really worth it?" The question revealed how little he understood about what my family had done to me. This wasn't about winning or losing. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about establishing that I wasn't a criminal. "Marcus, if I don't cooperate with the investigation, federal prosecutors will charge me as an accessory. I could go to prison for crimes I didn't commit." "Come on, Britt. You're being dramatic. No jury would convict you based on the evidence they have." His dismissive tone triggered something deep in my chest. the same casual disregard for my legitimate concerns that I'd heard from my family when I tried to explain the consequences of their theft. "Have you been talking to them?" I asked quietly. Marcus avoided my eyes, focusing instead on arranging the leftover rice in his container. "Tyler texted me a few times. He's really upset about this whole situation." "Tyler texted you." I repeated the words slowly, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. "What did he say?" "Just that he's worried about you, that you seem determined to hurt the family instead of working together to solve this problem." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent messages. Sure enough, there were texts between Marcus and my brother that I'd never seen before. Conversations where Tyler painted me as vindictive and unstable. Messages where Marcus agreed that I was overreacting to the situation. "You've been discussing my legal case with the people who are trying to frame me for federal crimes." Marcus finally looked at me directly. "They're not trying to frame you. They're scared people who made mistakes and don't know how to fix them." Mistakes. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "Marcus, they spent $28,000 of my employer's money and then claimed I told them to do it. That's not a mistake, that's criminal conspiracy." "See, this is what Tyler was talking about," Marcus said, standing up and pacing around my living room. "You're so focused on the legal technicalities that you can't see the human element. These are people who love you." I stared at the man I'd been dating for 8 months, wondering when he'd decided that my family's version of events was more credible than mine. When had he chosen their comfort over my legal safety? "People who love me don't steal my identity and then try to send me to prison," I said quietly. "They're not trying to send you to prison. They're trying to protect themselves from going to prison. There's a difference." The casual way he dismissed my family's willingness to sacrifice me for their own protection was more devastating than all of their financial crimes combined. The person I trusted most had decided that my legitimate grievances were less important than maintaining social harmony. "I need you to leave," I said. "Britt, don't be like this. We can work through this disagreement." "This isn't a disagreement, Marcus. This is you choosing to believe people who are lying about me instead of supporting me through the worst crisis of my life." He gathered his jacket and keys, shaking his head with disappointment. "I hope you reconsider this path you're on. Your family made mistakes, but destroying them won't undo what happened." After he left, I sat alone in my apartment and realized that my isolation was complete. My family viewed me as an expendable resource. My boyfriend prioritized their feelings over my legal safety. My colleagues were probably gossiping about the investigation and wondering if I was a criminal. I had no one left who believed my version of events or supported my decision to cooperate with law enforcement. Everyone in my life seemed to think I should accept responsibility for crimes I didn't commit in order to protect people who had systematically betrayed me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not from fear or anger, but from the profound loneliness of being completely abandoned by everyone I thought cared about me. But as I sat in the dark of my apartment surrounded by legal documents and evidence of my family's crimes, I realized something important. Their abandonment didn't change the truth about what they'd done to me, and their pressure to accept blame didn't obligate me to sacrifice my freedom for their comfort. I was alone, but I was also finally free to make decisions based on truth rather than family loyalty or social expectations. 2 days after Marcus left, I received a call that made my stomach drop into my shoes. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Rebecca Chen from First National Credit Monitoring, and her tone suggested this conversation would not improve my day. "Ms. Thompson, we're calling to inform you of suspicious activity detected on your credit profile. Are you currently in the process of applying for a large personal loan?" I sat down hard on my kitchen chair. "No, I'm not applying for any loans." "We show a $35,000 personal loan application submitted yesterday through Quick Cash Online Lending. The application has been approved and the funds have been dispersed to an account we have on file." $35,000. I closed my eyes and tried to process this new level of financial devastation. What account did the money go to? The funds were transferred to a checking account at Pacific Coast Bank registered to Patricia Thompson. Is this your mother? My mother had not only continued using my identity after the FBI investigation began, but she'd escalated to larger amounts and more sophisticated theft techniques. The audacity was breathtaking. "This is identity theft," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to report this immediately. We've placed a fraud alert on your credit profile, but you'll need to contact the lender directly to dispute the loan. You should also file a police report as soon as possible." After hanging up, I called Detective Martinez and explained the new development. She sighed heavily, a sound that suggested my family's criminal creativity was exhausting even experienced investigators. "We'll add this to the federal case," she said. "But Brittany, you need to understand that your credit profile is completely compromised. Your parents have had months to establish accounts and build debt in your name." She was right, and I was about to discover just how compromised my finances had become. Over the next 3 hours, I methodically called every major credit bureau and requested complete reports of all accounts associated with my Social Security number. The results were devastating. 17 credit cards I'd never applied for with combined limits of over $60,000. 3 store financing accounts for furniture and electronics I'd never purchased, 2 auto loans for vehicles I'd never seen, and now a $35,000 personal loan I'd never requested. Total unauthorized debt, $143,000. I printed out page after page of fraudulent accounts, watching my financial life dissolve into a mountain of paper evidence. Late payment notices for credit cards I didn't know existed, collection letters for defaulted accounts I'd never opened, garnishment orders for wages from a job that had suspended me pending criminal investigation. My credit score had plummeted from 750 to 420. My bank account had been frozen by multiple creditors seeking to recover funds from fraudulent purchases. My apartment lease renewal had been denied due to damaged credit, meaning I'd be homeless within 60 days unless I could find alternative housing. The systematic destruction of my financial life was so comprehensive that it seemed impossible to recover from. Every aspect of my economic existence had been corrupted by my family's criminal enterprise. But the cruelest discovery came when I found correspondence between my parents and the various creditors. Letters where they provided my employment information to establish my ability to pay debts I'd never incurred. Documents where they forged my signature on payment agreements for accounts I didn't know existed. They hadn't just stolen my identity. They'd created an entire fictional version of me that existed solely to generate credit for their benefit. A phantom Brittany Thompson who eagerly sought debt and willingly accepted financial obligations for other people's purchases. The phone rang while I was sorting through the collection notices. Detective Martinez again calling with more bad news. "The quick cash loan has already been withdrawn and transferred to multiple accounts," she said. "Your mother moved the money through several banks within hours of receiving it. We're working to trace the funds, but this level of sophistication suggests they've done this before. How many times before? We're finding evidence of similar loan applications dating back 8 months. Always in your name, always transferred immediately to accounts controlled by your family members. This $35,000 loan appears to be their largest single theft, but it's not their first." I hung up and stared at the financial wreckage spread across my kitchen table. $143,000 in unauthorized debt, damaged credit that would take years to repair, a frozen bank account and pending eviction. My family had not only stolen my identity, but they'd systematically destroyed my ability to rebuild my financial life independently. Even if the criminal charges were successful, I'd spend years proving my innocence to creditors and rebuilding credit that my parents had deliberately demolished. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood the true scope of my family's betrayal. They hadn't just committed crimes against me, they'd engineered my complete financial destruction to maximize their own criminal profits. And according to Marcus and my other former friends, I was supposed to forgive them and move forward as a happy family. My eviction notice arrived on a Thursday morning, giving me 30 days to vacate my apartment due to damaged credit and inability to verify employment. Staring at that official document, I realized that passive cooperation with law enforcement wasn't enough. If I wanted to survive this financially and legally, I needed to actively gather evidence against my family. That evening, I drove to my childhood home with a plan that terrified and empowered me in equal measure. I knew my parents' routines perfectly. Thursday nights meant dinner at their favorite casino buffet, followed by several hours of gambling. They'd be gone until at least midnight, giving me time to search for evidence of their criminal enterprise. I still had my key from years of house-sitting during their vacations. The familiar smell of my mother's lavender air freshener hit me as I stepped into the darkened living room, but nostalgia was immediately replaced by criminal determination. The basement office had always been my father's domain, cluttered with tax documents and business papers from his decades working construction. But when I descended the stairs and turned on the lights, I discovered something far more organized than my father's usual chaos. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with meticulous precision. Credit applications 2024, bank accounts active, identity documents, target profiles. The systematic organization was more thorough than any legitimate business I'd ever seen. I pulled out my phone and began photographing everything. The first filing cabinet contained practice sheets where my mother had perfected forging my signature. Dozens of pages showing her handwriting gradually transforming into a convincing imitation of mine. She'd practiced until she could reproduce my signature flawlessly. The second cabinet contained copies of documents I'd never given them. My birth certificate, social security card driver's license, passport college transcripts, employment verification letters. They'd somehow obtained perfect copies of every piece of identification I owned. But the third cabinet made my blood run cold. Manila folders labeled with names of family, friends, and distant relatives. Each folder contained detailed profiles, employment information addresses, social security numbers, credit reports, and handwritten notes about their financial vulnerabilities. Jennifer Martinez, Aunt Sandra's neighbor who always attended our holiday celebrations. The folder contained copies of her driver's license and a notation that she trusts family friends easily and mentioned student loan debt during Christmas dinner. Mike Rodriguez, Uncle Jerry's stepson who managed a downtown restaurant. His folder included copies of pay stubs and a note that he wants to buy a house soon and would appreciate help with down payment. Sarah Williams, my cousin who worked as a pediatric nurse. Her folder contained medical certification documents and a note that she feels guilty about student loans and mentioned wanting to consolidate debt. 12 folders. 12 people who trusted my family and had no idea they were being systematically profiled for identity theft. The fourth cabinet contained correspondence that revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise. Letters between my parents and other family members discussing recruitment strategies and profit-sharing arrangements. Email printouts where Aunt Sandra shared personal information about church members she'd befriended specifically for criminal purposes. One email from my mother to Uncle Jerry made me physically ill. Brittany has been the most profitable target so far. Corporate card access opens up much higher limits than we usually see. We should look for other family members with business connections. They'd evaluated me like a business opportunity. My love and trust weren't family bonds to be cherished, but resources to be exploited for maximum criminal profit. The most damaging evidence came from a folder labeled Legal Defense Strategy, documents where my parents had consulted with criminal attorneys about how to shift blame to victims if their scheme was discovered. Handwritten notes about making me appear to be the mastermind rather than the target. One page contained a detailed plan for portraying me as an ungrateful daughter who had exploited my family's financial desperation. Bullet points about emphasizing my education and income compared to their struggles. Strategies for presenting my legitimate financial assistance as evidence that I was comfortable using family members for illegal schemes. They'd planned my betrayal before they'd even committed the crimes I was being blamed for. I photographed every document, every folder, every piece of evidence that revealed the calculated nature of their criminal enterprise. 2 hours later, I had hundreds of photos documenting a sophisticated family fraud ring that had operated for over 2 years. As I prepared to leave, I noticed one more folder tucked behind the filing cabinets. The label read, "Future Targets, Next Generation." Inside were profiles of my teenage cousins. Sophie, my 16-year-old niece who was excited about getting her first job. Nathan, my 17-year-old nephew who'd just received his Social Security card. Emma's 14-year-old daughter who'd mentioned opening a savings account for college. Children. They were planning to expand their criminal operation to include children who couldn't possibly understand the consequences of identity theft. That discovery eliminated any remaining guilt I felt about cooperating with law enforcement. My family wasn't just committing crimes against me. They were planning to destroy the financial futures of the next generation of our family. I photographed the children's profiles and sent everything immediately to Detective Martinez. Whatever family loyalty I'd felt was now completely replaced by determination to protect other potential victims from the people who had systematically betrayed everyone who trusted them. Driving home from my parents' house, I finally understood that I wasn't destroying my family. I was stopping criminals who happened to share my DNA from destroying other innocent people. The evidence I'd gathered from my parents' basement transformed the FBI investigation from a single victim identity theft case into a multi-state criminal conspiracy probe. Detective Martinez called me the next morning with news that would change everything. "Brittany, the documentation you provided has opened up an entirely new dimension of this case. We're coordinating with federal agents in Nevada and Arizona to investigate the network your family has been operating." But the call that really changed my perspective came 3 hours later from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end sounded hesitant and scared. "Is this Brittany Thompson, the one whose family fraud case is in the news?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Rebecca Williams. I'm Sarah Williams' older sister. Sarah is your cousin, the nurse. I saw your story on the local news last night, and I think your family did the same thing to her." My heart started pounding. What happened to Sarah? 3 years ago, her credit was destroyed overnight. Someone opened credit cards and took out loans in her name. She lost her apartment and had to move in with me because no one would rent to her. She always suspected it was family members, but she was too ashamed to report it. "Is she willing to talk to the police?" "That's why I'm calling. She wants to help, but she's scared about coming forward. Your Aunt Sandra was the one who asked for copies of Sarah's documents, supposedly for family emergency contact information." Within an hour, Rebecca had connected me with a private Facebook group called Family Financial Abuse Survivors. The group had over 200 members, mostly young adults, whose relatives had stolen their identities and destroyed their credit. But what shocked me was discovering 5 other people in that group who had direct connections to my extended family network, people who'd attended our holiday gatherings, church events with Aunt Sandra, or neighborhood barbecues with Uncle Jerry. Michelle Rodriguez, who'd lost her mortgage approval when family friends destroyed her credit. "I met your Aunt Sandra at a church potluck," she told me during our first phone call. "She was so friendly and helpful. When I mentioned wanting to buy a house, she offered to help me understand the process. I gave her copies of my financial documents so she could review them. 2 weeks later, my bank called about suspicious credit applications. David Chen, whose identity was stolen after he helped my Uncle Jerry with a construction project. Jerry said he needed my Social Security number for tax paperwork since I was helping with the job. I trusted him because we'd known each other for years. Next thing I knew, I had $15,000 in credit card debt I'd never created." Jennifer Martinez, Aunt Sandra's neighbor, who'd been targeted exactly as their basement files indicated. Sandra borrowed my driver's license to help with some paperwork when I was going through my divorce. She said she wanted to research assistance programs for me. Instead, she used my information to open accounts and destroyed my credit during the most vulnerable time of my life. Each story followed the same pattern: friendly relatives or family friends identifying financial vulnerabilities, casual requests for personal documents or information, systematic identity theft disguised as helpful assistance. I coordinated with Detective Martinez to connect all of these victims with the federal investigation. Suddenly, the case against my family transformed from isolated incidents into evidence of a racketeering conspiracy spanning multiple states and dozens of victims. The private Facebook group became our informal headquarters for sharing information and supporting each other through the legal process. Many victims had never reported their crimes because they felt ashamed about being exploited by people they trusted. Family financial abuse is different from stranger identity theft, explained Dr. Patricia Moore, a criminologist who specialized in family fraud cases and joined our group to offer guidance. Victims feel guilt and responsibility that prevents them from seeking help. They blame themselves for trusting relatives instead of recognizing that exploitation of family relationships is a calculated criminal strategy. Her explanation helped me understand why I'd spent weeks feeling guilty about cooperating with law enforcement. I'd been programmed to prioritize family loyalty over my own legal safety, even when that family was systematically destroying my financial future. Working with other victims also revealed the true sophistication of my family's criminal enterprise. They developed recruiting techniques, practiced social engineering skills, and maintained detailed records of target vulnerabilities. This wasn't desperate people making poor choices. This was organized crime using family relationships as camouflage. The Facebook group grew as we shared resources and encouraged other victims to come forward. Local news stations began covering our story, focusing on the unusual pattern of family members targeting their own relatives for identity theft. But the breakthrough that would ultimately destroy my family's defense came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Martinez had kept detailed records of her interactions with Aunt Sandra, including audio recordings she'd made during the divorce proceedings, when she was being cautious about all new relationships. "I recorded everyone I dealt with during that time," she explained. "I was paranoid about being taken advantage of when I was so vulnerable." The recordings captured Aunt Sandra discussing recruitment strategies with my mother over the phone, conversations where they evaluated potential targets and shared techniques for gaining access to personal information. In one particularly damaging recording, my mother's voice was clearly audible saying, "The key is making them feel like you're helping them solve a financial problem. Once they trust you with one document, they'll give you access to everything." Detective Martinez called the recordings the smoking gun that proves criminal intent and conspiracy. They demonstrated that my family's identity theft wasn't opportunistic crime, but calculated predatory behavior targeting vulnerable people within their social networks. As I listened to my mother's voice describing techniques for manipulating people who trusted her, I realized that my family had never loved me or anyone else. They developed expertise in mimicking love and concern to exploit people for financial gain. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely free from guilt about cooperating with law enforcement. I wasn't betraying my family. I was stopping predators who had spent years perfecting techniques for destroying the lives of people who cared about them. 6 weeks after the investigation began, I received a call that I never expected. Janet Morrison from Preston and Associates asked me to come to the office for a meeting that would determine my future with the company. I dressed carefully in my best professional attire, preparing for what I assumed would be my formal termination. The corporate credit card incident had cost the company nearly $30,000 and generated negative publicity about their financial controls. I couldn't imagine any scenario where they'd want me to return. But when I arrived at the conference room, I found Janet waiting with David Chen from accounting, Marcus Webb from legal, and someone I'd never met before, Amanda Foster, Senior Vice President of Corporate Security. "Brittany, please sit down," Janet said, her tone more serious than usual but not hostile. "We've been following the federal investigation closely, and we need to discuss your future with Preston and Associates." Amanda Foster opened a laptop and pulled out several folders. "The FBI has provided us with detailed evidence of your family's criminal enterprise. Based on that evidence, the company recognizes you as a victim of sophisticated identity theft rather than a perpetrator of corporate fraud. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Amanda wasn't finished. More importantly, your handling of this crisis has impressed senior management. Your immediate cooperation with investigators, your thorough documentation of the evidence, and your commitment to protecting the company's interests demonstrate exactly the kind of integrity we value in our employees. Janet leaned forward. Which brings us to why we asked you here today. The board of directors has approved the creation of a new corporate security division, and we'd like you to head that department. I stared at her in shock. I'm sorry, what? Marcus Webb smiled. Your experience as a victim of sophisticated financial fraud combined with your investigative skills and ethical commitment makes you uniquely qualified to help other companies prevent similar crimes. Amanda explained the position. You'd be responsible for developing fraud prevention protocols, training employees to recognize identity theft schemes, and consulting with other businesses that have experienced similar incidents. The salary is $68,000 annually plus stock options and performance bonuses. The offer was $15,000 more than my previous marketing coordinator position, with opportunities for advancement that had never existed in client services. But there was one significant requirement. However, Janet continued, accepting this position requires testifying in federal court against your family members. The company needs assurance that you're committed to prosecuting financial crimes regardless of personal relationships. The ultimatum was clear. Choose between family loyalty and professional advancement. Accept the promotion and publicly destroy my parents' legal defense, or decline and face an uncertain future with damaged credit and limited employment prospects. I need some time to consider this, I said. Of course, Amanda replied, but we need an answer by Friday. The position starts immediately, and we have several client companies requesting fraud prevention consultations. As I drove home from the meeting, my phone rang with a call from Marcus. Not my ex-boyfriend Marcus, but Marcus Webb from Preston and Associates Legal Department. Brittany, I wanted to follow up on something Amanda mentioned. If you accept this position, you'll be working directly with federal prosecutors on multiple cases. Your family's scheme appears to be connected to similar frauds in other states. What do you mean? The techniques your family used are being employed by fraud rings across the country. Your testimony and expertise could help prosecute dozens of similar cases and protect hundreds of potential victims. The scope of impact was staggering. My decision wouldn't just affect my family's legal case, but could influence the prosecution of criminal networks throughout the western United States. That evening, I called Detective Martinez to discuss the implications of accepting the corporate security position. Brittany, this opportunity is unprecedented, she said. Most fraud victims struggle to rebuild their careers after identity theft. You're being offered a chance to turn your victimization into expertise that could help countless other people. But it means testifying against my parents in federal court, making their convictions more likely. Your parents made their choices when they decided to commit federal crimes. You're not responsible for the consequences of their criminal behavior. She was right, but the emotional weight of potentially sending my own parents to federal prison was overwhelming. Even after everything they'd done to me, the prospect of testifying against them felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. There's something else you should know, Detective Martinez continued. Your parents' attorney contacted the prosecutor's office today. They're claiming you orchestrated the entire fraud scheme, and that accepting this corporate security position proves you planned everything to benefit your own career. The accusation was so absurd it was almost laughable. According to their defense, I'd masterminded a complex criminal conspiracy in order to get promoted from marketing coordinator to corporate security director. The logic made no sense, but it demonstrated their willingness to destroy my reputation completely to avoid responsibility for their crimes. Can they really make that argument in court? Their attorney will try, but the evidence against them is overwhelming. Your cooperation and the testimony from other victims has built an airtight case. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my parents had made this decision easy. By continuing to blame me for their crimes, they'd eliminated any obligation I felt to protect them from the consequences of their choices. I called Janet Morrison and accepted the corporate security position. My first week as director of corporate security at Preston & Associates involved training sessions with federal prosecutors to prepare for testimony in United States versus Patricia Thompson, Frank Thompson, Sandra Martinez, and Jerome Williams. The case had expanded to include my aunt and uncle as co-conspirators in the racketeering charges. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Chen briefed me on the defense strategy my family's attorneys were planning to employ. What I learned made my stomach turn with a mixture of disgust and determination. "They're claiming you were the mastermind of the entire operation," Lisa explained, spreading out defense documents across the conference table. "According to their version of events, you recruited your family members to help you steal corporate funds and then betrayed them when the scheme was discovered." She showed me text messages my parents had submitted as evidence of my supposed criminal leadership. Messages where I'd told them to get whatever you need when they'd asked to borrow my credit card. Communications where I'd said, "Don't worry about paying me back right away," after helping with emergency expenses. They're taking normal expressions of family generosity and presenting them as criminal instructions. Lisa continued, "Your mother's testimony claims you explicitly told her the corporate credit card was available for family use. The audacity of their lies was breathtaking. They'd turned years of my financial assistance into evidence that I'd been grooming them for criminal conspiracy. Every act of love and support was being twisted into proof of criminal intent. What's their explanation for the identity theft that started months before the corporate card incident?" I asked. "They claim you provided them with your personal information and encouraged them to open accounts in your name as part of building credit for future business ventures." Defense attorney documents painted a picture of me as a sophisticated criminal who'd manipulated my innocent parents into participating in complex financial fraud. They portrayed themselves as naive victims of their educated daughter's criminal expertise. "Do people actually believe this?" I asked. Lisa smiled grimly. "Juries can be unpredictable, but we have overwhelming evidence of their criminal intent. The basement files you discovered the recordings. Jennifer Martinez made the testimony from other victims. Your parents' defense requires the jury to believe that you're an evil genius who documented your own crimes and then cooperated extensively with law enforcement to frame innocent family members." Over the following weeks, I worked with prosecutors to prepare my testimony. The process involved reviewing hundreds of documents, practicing responses to hostile cross-examination, and emotionally preparing to face my parents in federal court. The most difficult part was reviewing evidence that demonstrated the calculated nature of their crimes. Audio recordings where my mother discussed recruitment techniques, financial records showing systematic exploitation of multiple victims, handwritten notes where they evaluated family members as potential targets for criminal schemes. "Your family operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise," Lisa explained. "They developed expertise in social engineering, practiced forgery techniques, and maintained detailed records of victim vulnerabilities. This wasn't desperation or poor judgment. This was professional-level criminal activity." But the evidence that ultimately convinced me I was making the right choice came from a source I'd never expected. Sophie, my 16-year-old niece, contacted me through Facebook with information that made my blood run cold. "Aunt Brittany, I need to tell you something about Grandma and Grandpa. They asked me to apply for a credit card last month. They said it would help me build credit for college, but they wanted me to give them the card when it arrived." My parents had moved forward with their plan to recruit teenagers into their criminal network. Even while facing federal charges, they were continuing to expand their fraud operation to include children who couldn't possibly understand the consequences. "Did you apply for the card?" I asked. "No, I got scared and told my mom. She said I should stay away from Grandma and Grandpa until their legal problems are resolved." Emma had protected her daughter from our parents' criminal recruitment. The irony was stunning. My sister, who'd initially supported our parents and accepted the stolen car, had recognized the danger they posed to her child and cut off contact completely. Sophie, would you be willing to tell the prosecutor about what they asked you to do? If it helps protect other kids, yes. Her testimony would be devastating to my parents' defense. It proved they were continuing to commit crimes even after being arrested, and it demonstrated their willingness to exploit children for financial gain. When I informed Lisa Chen about Sophie's testimony, she immediately added my niece to the witness list. This establishes ongoing criminal behavior and predatory targeting of minors, Lisa explained. Combined with the basement files showing profiles of teenage family members, it proves your parents view children as renewable resources for criminal exploitation. As my court date approached, I felt emotionally prepared to testify against people who had spent months planning my destruction. They'd stolen my identity, damaged my credit, threatened my career, tried to frame me for their crimes, and attempted to recruit my teenage niece into their criminal enterprise. I wasn't betraying my family by testifying against them. I was protecting innocent people from predators who happened to share my DNA. The federal courthouse in downtown Sacramento buzzed with activity on the morning of my testimony. Media vans lined the street outside, drawn by the unusual story of family members systematically targeting their own relatives for identity theft. I'd become the public face of family financial abuse, a crime that many people didn't realize existed. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Chen met me in the witness preparation room an hour before court convened. "Are you ready for this, Brittany?" I nodded, clutching the folder containing evidence that would destroy my parents' defense. "I have something that will end this trial." Over the weekend, I'd made a decision that had taken tremendous courage. Using techniques I'd learned in my new corporate security position, I'd recorded my final phone conversations with my parents. What I'd captured on those recordings would shock the jury and eliminate any sympathy they might have felt for my family. "What kind of recording?" Lisa asked. Phone calls where my parents discuss expanding their fraud operation to include teenage family members. Conversations where they plan to use my niece Sophie and other young relatives for practice. Runs before targeting adults with higher credit limits. Lisa's eyes widened. "Please tell me you followed proper legal procedures for these recordings." California is a two-party consent state, but federal law allows recording when documenting ongoing crimes. My parents are currently on bail for conspiracy charges, and these conversations contain evidence of continuing criminal behavior. I'd spent hours researching the legal requirements for covertly recording criminal activity. The conversations I'd captured were completely admissible as evidence of ongoing fraud conspiracy. What exactly did they say? I pulled out my phone and played the most damaging recording. My mother's voice was clearly audible discussing recruitment strategies with my father. "Sophie is perfect for our next phase," Mom said. "Teenagers have clean credit histories and they trust family members completely. We can teach her how to apply for cards and build up her limits gradually." Dad's voice responded, "The key is starting small so they don't get suspicious. A few $100s here and there until they're comfortable with larger amounts. Plus, if we get caught, juries sympathize with grandparents more than they do with young adults. We can claim we were helping our granddaughter build credit for college." Lisa stopped the recording. "This is incredibly damaging testimony. They're planning to commit new crimes and discussing how to manipulate jury sympathy if they're prosecuted." There's more. The second recording captured my parents discussing their strategy for framing me as the criminal mastermind. Their casual conversation revealed the calculated nature of their defense. "The prosecutor believes Brittany is a victim." Mom said, "But we need to make the jury see her as the smart one who used us as fall guys." "Her new job in corporate security actually helps our case," Dad replied. "We can argue she planned everything to advance her career. Who gets promoted after being accused of corporate fraud unless they're controlling the whole situation?" The cynical manipulation of my professional success into evidence of criminal conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity. They were arguing that my ability to rebuild after being victimized proved I'd orchestrated my own victimization. But the recording that would ultimately destroy them completely captured something even more disturbing. If this trial doesn't go well, Mom said we might need to consider more permanent solutions to the Brittany problem. "What do you mean?" Dad asked. "I mean making sure she can't testify against us in future cases. There are ways to discredit witnesses that don't require legal strategies." Lisa stopped the recording and immediately picked up her phone. "This sounds like witness intimidation or potentially conspiracy to obstruct justice. We need to inform the FBI immediately. There's one more recording you need to hear." The final conversation captured my parents planning to recruit additional teenagers from their extended family network. They discussed my cousin Nathan, who was turning 18 and would soon have access to higher credit limits. They talked about Emma's younger daughter, who would be eligible for her first credit card in 2 years. "The beautiful thing about family fraud is that victims usually don't report it," Dad said on the recording. "Kids especially won't turn in their grandparents. We just need to be more careful about documentation this time." When I finished playing the recordings, Lisa sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "Brittany, this evidence transforms the entire case. Your parents aren't just guilty of past fraud. They're actively planning new crimes and discussing ways to intimidate witnesses." "I know, that's why I had to record them." These recordings prove ongoing criminal conspiracy, witness intimidation, and predatory targeting of minors. Combined with your other testimony, this will result in significantly enhanced sentences. As we walked into the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of peace. My parents had made their choices. They'd chosen to continue committing crimes even after being arrested. They'd chosen to recruit children into their criminal enterprise. They'd chosen to threaten me for cooperating with law enforcement. I wasn't sending them to prison. Their own recorded words were sending them to prison. When I was sworn in as a witness, I looked directly at my parents sitting at the defense table. They stared back with expressions of fury and betrayal, as if I'd somehow wronged them by documenting their ongoing crimes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely confident that I was doing the right thing. Some family relationships aren't worth preserving when they're built on systematic exploitation and criminal behavior. I raised my right hand and prepared to tell the truth that would finally end my family's criminal enterprise. The courtroom fell silent as I began playing the recorded conversations for the jury. 12 strangers listened to my parents casually discussing plans to recruit teenagers for identity theft and strategies for intimidating witnesses who cooperated with law enforcement. The impact on the jury was immediate and visible. Several members shook their heads in disgust when they heard my mother explaining how to manipulate young relatives who trust family members completely. One juror, a grandmother herself, looked physically ill when my father described teenagers as perfect targets with clean credit histories. But the recording that sealed their fate captured my parents discussing permanent solutions to the Brittany problem. When the jury heard my mother suggesting ways to discredit witnesses that don't require legal strategies, the defense attorney's objections couldn't undo the damage. During cross-examination, defense attorney Michael Rodriguez tried desperately to salvage his client's case. "Ms. Thompson, isn't it true that you recorded these conversations illegally to frame your parents for crimes they didn't commit?" "No," I replied calmly. "I recorded ongoing criminal conspiracy as documented evidence of continued illegal behavior." "You're testifying against your own parents to advance your career, aren't you?" "I'm testifying to protect other potential victims from systematic criminal exploitation." These recorded conversations could be taken out of context, couldn't they? Lisa Chen stood up for her redirect examination. "Ms. Thompson, please tell the jury exactly what context would make planning identity theft against teenagers and threatening witnesses appropriate family behavior." "There is no context that makes those conversations appropriate," I replied. "Criminal conspiracy to exploit children and intimidate witnesses is illegal, regardless of family relationships." The trial lasted 3 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt after my testimony. Jennifer Martinez testified about Aunt Sandra's recruitment techniques. Sarah Williams described how family trust was exploited to obtain personal information. Sophie testified about my parents' attempts to recruit her for credit card fraud. Other victims shared their experiences of financial devastation and family betrayal. The pattern of systematic exploitation was so clear that even the defense attorneys seemed to recognize their case was hopeless. On the final day of testimony, something unexpected happened. My father asked to address the court directly. Frank Thompson stood up slowly, looking older and more frail than I'd ever seen him. When he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "Your Honor, I need to tell the truth about what we did." Defense attorney Rodriguez immediately objected, but Dad continued speaking. "We're guilty of everything the government says we did. My daughter Brittany is innocent. She never knew about our crimes, never participated in our schemes, and never deserved what we put her through." Mom grabbed his arm, trying to stop him from speaking, but Dad pulled away. "Patricia, we can't keep lying. We destroyed our daughter's life and tried to send her to prison for crimes we committed. That's not what parents do to children they love." The confession that followed was devastating in its completeness. Dad admitted to systematic identity theft, forging documents, opening fraudulent accounts, and planning to recruit teenage family members. He explained how his gambling addiction had created desperate financial pressure that led to increasingly criminal behavior. "I started gambling online 5 years ago," he said through tears. "Small amounts at first, but it escalated quickly. I lost our retirement savings, our emergency fund, everything we'd worked for. Instead of getting help for my addiction, Patricia and I decided to solve our financial problems by stealing from family members." Mom finally broke down and joined his confession. "We told ourselves we were borrowing money we'd pay back eventually," she said. "But that was a lie. We were stealing from people who loved and trusted us. We destroyed Brittany's credit, damaged her career, and then tried to frame her for our crimes." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my parents crying. After months of lies and manipulation, they were finally telling the truth about their criminal enterprise. "We don't deserve forgiveness," Dad continued, "but we need our daughter and everyone else to know that this was our choice, our crime, our responsibility. Brittany did nothing wrong except trust parents who didn't deserve her trust." Judge Sarah Martinez accepted their guilty pleas and scheduled sentencing for the following month. As court adjourned, my parents approached me with their attorney. "Brittany." Mom said quietly, "We're sorry. We know that's not enough, but we needed you to hear us say it." I looked at the two people who had given me life and then systematically tried to destroy it. Their apology felt genuine, but it couldn't undo the months of criminal behavior and betrayal. "I forgive you," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean I can trust you again." Dad nodded. "We understand. We just wanted you to know that we finally recognize what we did to you." As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. My parents were finally taking responsibility for their crimes, but our family relationships were permanently damaged by their choices. Justice had been served, but at the cost of destroying the family bonds I'd spent my entire life trying to preserve. 6 months after the trial ended, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. My parents were serving 18-month federal sentences, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, during which they were required to attend gambling addiction treatment and make restitution to their victims. Aunt Sandra and Uncle Jerry received similar sentences, while the broader family fraud network was systematically dismantled by federal investigators across 3 states. 47 people were ultimately prosecuted in connection with identity theft schemes that had victimized over 200 individuals. My new position as Director of Corporate Security had evolved beyond my original job description at Preston & Associates. Major corporations across California were requesting fraud prevention consultations, and I'd become a recognized expert in family financial abuse cases. The personal satisfaction of helping other victims rebuild their lives provided meaning that made my family's betrayal feel worthwhile. Every consultation where I helped companies protect employees from identity theft felt like justice for what my parents had done to me. But the most meaningful development in my new life came from an unexpected source. Emma, my sister, who'd initially defended our parents and kept the stolen Honda Civic, contacted me with a proposal that would change our relationship forever. "Britt, I need to make amends for what I did," she said during our first conversation in months. "I kept that car knowing it was bought with stolen money. I defended Mom and Dad when I should have supported you. I was wrong about everything." Emma had returned the Honda Civic to the dealership and was working extra shifts as a waitress to pay restitution for her share of the corporate credit card charges. But her real transformation involved something much more significant. "I want to help other families avoid what happened to us," she continued. "Would you consider letting me volunteer with your fraud prevention work?" I was skeptical at first. Emma's initial reaction to our parents' crimes had demonstrated poor judgment and misplaced loyalty, but her commitment to making amends appeared genuine, and her personal experience as both a victim and an enabler provided unique perspectives for helping other families. Tyler had undergone a similar transformation. After returning the Yamaha motorcycle and testifying against our parents, he'd used his mechanical skills to start a small business helping fraud victims repair their financial lives. "I realize that supporting family doesn't mean enabling criminal behavior," he explained when he joined Emma in volunteering for fraud prevention programs. "Real family members protect each other from making destructive choices." Together, we created the Thompson Family Financial Abuse Prevention Initiative, a nonprofit organization that provided resources for families affected by identity theft and financial exploitation. Our unique perspective as siblings who'd experienced family fraud from multiple angles made us effective advocates for other victims. The nonprofit work brought us closer together than we'd ever been as children. Working toward shared goals of protecting vulnerable people from financial predators helped rebuild trust that our parents' crimes had destroyed. But not all of my relationships survived the transformation of my life. Marcus had never apologized for siding with my family during the investigation, and his attempts to reconnect after the trial felt shallow and opportunistic. "I always knew you were innocent," he claimed during one phone conversation. "I was just trying to help everyone work together to solve the problem." His revisionist history of events made continuing any relationship impossible. I'd learned to distinguish between people who supported me during difficult times and people who prioritized social comfort over moral principles. The most unexpected relationship development came through my work with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Martinez had become a close friend during the investigation, and our professional collaboration gradually evolved into personal attraction. "I've never met anyone with your combination of integrity and resilience," she told me during dinner one evening. "Most fraud victims become bitter and withdrawn. You turned your victimization into expertise that helps other people." Dating someone who understood the criminal justice system and respected my commitment to prosecuting financial crimes felt natural in ways my relationship with Marcus never had. Sarah valued truth and justice over social harmony, making her support during difficult decisions feel genuine and reliable. My parents wrote letters from federal prison expressing remorse for their crimes and gratitude that I'd helped them understand the seriousness of their behavior. Dad's gambling addiction treatment had apparently helped him recognize how his financial desperation had escalated into systematic criminal behavior. "We're grateful you stopped us before we destroyed more lives," Mom wrote. "The teenagers we were planning to recruit deserve better than what we would have done to them." Their letters felt sincere, but I maintained emotional distance that protected me from further manipulation. Forgiveness didn't require trust, and I'd learned that some family relationships needed strict boundaries to remain healthy. My credit score had recovered to 720 through victim assistance programs and diligent financial management. I'd purchased a small house in a quiet neighborhood where I could host nonprofit fundraising events and provide temporary housing for fraud victims who needed safe places to rebuild their lives. The house became a symbol of independence I'd never experienced while enabling my family's financial dysfunction. every mortgage payment felt like proof that I could build a stable life based on my own efforts rather than exploiting other people's trust. As I reflected on the year that had changed everything about my life, I realized that discovering my family's criminal behavior had been devastating, but ultimately liberating. I'd learned to prioritize my own well-being over maintaining relationships with people who viewed me as a resource to be exploited. Verse 2. The Thompson Family Financial Abuse Prevention Initiative was expanding to 3 additional states, helping dozens of families recognize and report financial crimes committed by trusted relatives. Emma and Tyler had become effective advocates who could speak from personal experience about the complex emotions involved in prosecuting family members. My work provided purpose that made my family's betrayal feel meaningful rather than simply tragic. Every victim I helped protect from financial predators felt like justice for what my parents had done to me and countless other people they'd targeted. 1 year after my parents were sentenced to federal prison, I stood in the conference room at Preston and Associates, addressing a group of corporate executives from companies across the western United States. The Thompson Family Financial Abuse Prevention Initiative had grown from a personal mission into a nationally recognized organization that helped businesses protect employees from identity theft schemes. Family financial abuse affects 1 in 12 American adults, I told the assembled executives. The average victim loses $43,000 and spends 3 years rebuilding their credit. But the emotional damage often lasts much longer than the financial recovery. After the presentation, Amanda Foster approached me with news that would represent another major milestone in rebuilding my life. Brittany, the board has approved expanding your corporate security division into a separate consulting company. We're offering you the opportunity to purchase the division and operate it independently while maintaining Preston and Associates as your primary client. The proposal was extraordinary. I'd be able to build my own business around fraud prevention while maintaining the financial security of corporate contracts. The opportunity represented complete professional independence that I'd never imagined possible. The buyout terms are extremely generous, Amanda continued. Essentially, we're investing in your expertise and expecting the consulting company to grow into a regional leader in corporate fraud prevention. That evening, I called Sarah Martinez to share the news. We'd been dating for 8 months, and her support had been crucial in helping me navigate the emotional complexities of rebuilding after family betrayal. Congratulations, she said. You've turned the worst experience of your life into a successful career helping other people. Your parents' crimes ended up creating opportunities they never intended. She was right. My family's systematic identity theft had forced me to develop expertise in financial crime prevention that made me valuable to corporations and law enforcement agencies. Their betrayal had ultimately led to professional success I never could have achieved in marketing. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' criminal behavior had inadvertently launched the career that would define the rest of my life. Over the weekend, I visited my parents at the federal correctional facility where they were serving their sentences. The monthly visits had become routine, providing opportunities for them to express remorse, while I maintained emotional boundaries that protected my well-being. We're proud of what you've accomplished, Dad said during our conversation in the visiting room. You turned our mistakes into something positive that helps other families. You built something meaningful from the wreckage we created, Mom added. That takes strength we never gave you credit for. Their pride felt genuine but complicated. I appreciated their remorse and support, but I couldn't forget that their criminal behavior had been systematic and premeditated rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. I've learned to forgive you, I told them, but rebuilding trust will take much longer than serving your sentences. They nodded with understanding that seemed realistic rather than manipulative. Prison had apparently given them time to reflect on the impact of their crimes and the damage they'd done to relationships with people who loved them. The following Monday, I signed papers to purchase the corporate security division and establish Thompson Security Consulting as an independent business. Emma and Tyler joined the company as full-time employees, having proven their commitment to fraud prevention through months of volunteer work. "Working together feels different now," Emma said during our first staff meeting. "We're choosing to be family instead of being stuck with each other." She was right. Our relationships had been rebuilt on shared values of honesty and mutual support, rather than obligation and enabling dysfunction. We'd learned to distinguish between healthy family loyalty and toxic protection of harmful behavior. The nonprofit organization continued operating alongside the consulting business, providing resources for fraud victims while generating referrals for corporate clients who wanted to protect their employees from similar crimes. 6 months later, Detective Martinez and I moved in together, sharing a house that accommodated both her law enforcement career and my consulting business. Her understanding of criminal behavior and support for prosecuting financial crimes made our relationship feel stable in ways I'd never experienced. "You know what I admire most about you?" she asked one evening while we planned a fundraising event for the nonprofit. "You refuse to let other people's betrayal make you bitter or cynical. You turned their crimes into motivation to protect other people." Her observation helped me understand how I'd survived the destruction of my family relationships without losing faith in the possibility of building healthy connections with people who shared my values. The fundraising event raised over $50,000 for victim assistance programs while highlighting the success stories of families who'd recovered from financial abuse. Emma shared her perspective as someone who'd initially enabled criminal behavior before recognizing the importance of supporting truth over family loyalty. Tyler discussed his transformation from someone who'd benefited from stolen money to someone who dedicated his career to helping fraud victims rebuild their financial lives. His mechanical skills had evolved into expertise in helping people repair credit and establish new financial accounts after identity theft. As I looked around the room at colleagues, friends, and supporters who'd helped build our organization, I realized that I'd created a chosen family of people who valued integrity and mutual support. These relationships felt more authentic and reliable than the family bonds I'd tried to preserve despite systematic betrayal. The evening concluded with recognition of Detective Martinez's contributions to prosecuting family fraud cases throughout California. Her work had resulted in over 200 criminal convictions and helped establish legal precedents that made family financial abuse easier to prosecute. The Thompson case was unique because the victims chose truth over family loyalty, she told the audience. Their courage to testify against relatives who'd betrayed them has protected countless other potential victims from similar exploitation. As we drove home from the event, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since discovering my parents using my corporate credit card. The trauma of family betrayal had led to career success, meaningful relationships, and opportunities to protect other people from similar crimes. "Do you ever regret cooperating with the investigation?" Sarah asked. "Never," I replied without hesitation. Protecting other potential victims was more important than maintaining relationships with people who viewed me as a resource to be exploited. The question reminded me of the guilt I'd felt during those first weeks when Marcus and other friends had pressured me to prioritize family loyalty over legal cooperation. Learning to distinguish between authentic love and manipulative exploitation had been the most valuable lesson of this entire experience. My parents' letters from prison continued expressing gratitude that I'd helped them understand the seriousness of their criminal behavior before they'd recruited teenagers into their fraud schemes. Their gambling addiction treatment and financial counseling appeared to be genuine, but I maintained boundaries that protected me from future manipulation. Emma and Tyler had rebuilt relationships with our parents based on honest acknowledgement of their crimes, rather than enabling denial or minimization. The family dynamics felt healthier than they'd ever been when built on truth instead of financial codependency. As I prepared for sleep that night, I thought about the question I would pose to viewers who'd followed this journey from corporate fraud victim to successful business owner and family financial abuse advocate. Family relationships should be built on love, support, and mutual respect. When relatives view you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be cherished, establishing firm boundaries becomes an act of self-preservation rather than betrayal. Have you ever experienced family members who prioritize their financial benefit over your well-being? How did you protect yourself while maintaining your own integrity and values? If this story resonated with your own experiences or helped you understand the complex emotions involved in family financial abuse, please share it with others who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in facing these difficult situations. Thank you for joining me through this journey of discovering that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior, even when that behavior comes from people who share your DNA. Remember that authentic family relationships are characterized by mutual support and respect, rather than systematic exploitation. You deserve connections with people who celebrate your success, rather than trying to profit from your resources. The people who truly love you will support your commitment to truth and justice, even when that commitment requires difficult choices about family loyalty. I hope this story encourages you to build relationships based on genuine care and mutual respect, and to recognize that protecting yourself from exploitation is always the right choice, regardless of family pressure to accept harmful treatment. Please comment below with your own experiences or questions about family financial abuse. Like this video if it helped you understand these complex relationship dynamics. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building authentic connections. And share this content with anyone who might benefit from understanding that family love should never require accepting criminal exploitation. The truth may sometimes destroy relationships that weren't worth preserving, but it will always lead to connections with people who value your well-being over their own convenience.